I want you to think with me for a moment of a week or a moment that changed your life. A moment that you experienced something that changed the future of your life. It might have been something wonderful like the birth of a child or getting married or a new job or a new home or moving to a new location. Or maybe it's not quite as lovely and exciting to think about. Maybe it was the loss of a loved one. Maybe it was a bad medical diagnosis. Maybe it was the loss of a job or a home or a relationship. But I think all of us understand this idea that in the timeline that is our life, that we have all experienced moments, weeks, days, months that have changed the course of the rest of our lives. I think through not just on a personal level, but there's also moments in human history that have changed the course of history. I think back to that moment in 2001, 9/11. It takes on a whole new meaning. The numbers 9/11 mean something completely different than they ever did before. And then also, to understand that there are moments inside of human history. Anytime a war starts, there's a moment that it stops and things change and people move into a different way of thinking, a different mindset. I think about July 4th, 1776, when America declared its independence from Britain. Like there's these moments in history that have just changed moments. They have changed history. They have changed the course of the way people operate and move forward. When I think about my own life, I think about the first time that Callie agreed to go on a date with me. And that was a big day. I'm just going to lie. I'm like, this is great. I can't believe it. God is so good because she is so beautiful and I'm me. Like, that's just what I was thinking while that's going on. But that first week, that first time we went on a date and being able to see her and be with her, and then fast forward to the birth of our first son, Emerson, and becoming a parent for the very first time. And that seemed to have a lot more diapers involved with it than the first memory. There's just like your life begins to revolve around other things in life that we don't need to talk about. If you're a parent, you understand what that's like. I think back to 2015 when we launched this church. And to think back that changed the course of my life. It changed the place that I was at. It changed the lives of other people. When I think back to the number of people who have been baptized, the number of people who have declared their faith in Jesus, who have met Jesus in this place, I think back to that moment. It changed the future. There's significant moments in each and every one of our lives, both good and bad and otherwise. Sometimes just plain bad and ugly. And the interesting part of all of it is that today we are going to be starting a new message series called Timeline. And we're going to be walking through a timeline of the last week of Jesus' earthly ministry. The last week that starts today, we celebrate Palm Sunday, which is the final time when Jesus will enter into Jerusalem. He will enter in for the very last time. And so we're going to celebrate, we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the otherwise when it comes to the final week of Jesus' earthly ministry. Now, this last week, this timeline that we're going to look at, it didn't just change my life, and it just didn't change just a couple of people's lives. It wasn't just good for a single generation in a single location for a single demographic. No, this week, this moment, this timeline, it changed all of human history in the most significant way of any other moment in all of history. And that's not just coming from a pastor. It's not just because I follow Jesus. It's not just because I love Jesus. It's not just according to a historian, not just according to biblical scholars, not just according to theologians, but all of those things across the board understand that the death of Jesus was incredibly significant. More significant in the life of humanity than any other moment or week. And so today we look at the timeline of the week of Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday and beyond. We're going to explore all that took place, Jesus' actions, and how the events that happened inside of that week not only altered the course of human history, but how they profoundly influence our lives today as well. And so today is called Palm Sunday. It represents the beginning of Jesus' final week on the planet. It represents the beginning of this week, a beginning of this time that takes us all the way to Easter. And this is what it says inside of Scripture. As Jesus and his disciples approached Jerusalem, they came to the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent two of them on ahead. Go into the village over there, he said. As soon as you enter it, you will see a donkey tied there with its colt beside it. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone asks what you are doing, just say, the Lord needs them, and he will immediately let you take them. This took place to fulfill the prophecy that said, "Tell the people of Jerusalem, look, your king is coming to you. He is humble, riding on a donkey." Now, I love the detail of this story, and I think my favorite part is, if anybody gives you any trouble that you're stealing their donkey and its colt, just tell them the Lord needs it. Like, I don't know about you, but if you've got a donkey at your house and it's yours, and like a couple of guys walk into your yard and just untie your donkey and its colt and start walking away with it, and you're like, "Hey, yo, what's up? What's going on?" Don't worry, the Lord needs them. I'm like, that's great, bring my donkey back. But like this detail in this moment, it's just like they are living in an era, in a phase where they understand that this is something to fulfill words that have been spoken hundreds of years prior. Jesus, he comes into Jerusalem. And this is significant because Jesus has been working incognito a little bit. Jesus, he heals people, and then he says, but don't tell anybody who healed you. Don't tell anybody where you've been. Don't tell other people that it was me. And in this moment, Jesus is going public with the fact that he is the Son of God. This is one of the first times that Jesus refers to himself as the King. Tell the people of Jerusalem, look, your king is coming. He is humble and riding on a donkey. That is a significant statement. Jesus is specifically saying that so that other people would understand that this is a significant moment. This is only a story that God could write. Like, honestly, think about it. Put yourself in Jesus' position. If you have been said that you are going to be the king or the queen, and you're supposed to write the processional of you entering into the capital city where everybody is going to worship you and praise you, that processional is going to have nothing to do with you riding on the back of a donkey. Nobody is going to pick that. It is going to be a white horse with chariots. For me, it's going to be like the Mockingjay with the flames coming off of the chariot. My tuxedo is probably going to light up in flames, and there's going to be fireworks going off, and the aircraft are going to fly over the top, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. But the story of God, it says that he is humble, and he is riding on a donkey, and that just isn't a story that any other human being would write. Yet Jesus, he comes inside of this humble experience. He's the king and he's the Messiah. The reason that Jesus says, tell Jerusalem that your king is coming and he is humble and he is riding on a donkey. This is important because all of these people inside of Jerusalem, they know the prophecy. They know what has been written. They know the story, and they have been waiting for this fulfillment to take place for generations. So their parents wanted this, and their grandparents wanted this, and their great-grandparents wanted this, and their great-great-grandparents wanted this, and here they are thinking in this moment, oh my word, could this be the moment? Could this be the one? Could this be the Messiah that we have been waiting for? Because they knew that the prophecy said that the king, the Messiah, will come, and he will be humbly riding on the back of a donkey. And so when they hear this, it begins to cause this uprising, this uproar, this celebration, this excitement. Because finally, just finally, there may be the king, the Messiah that they've been waiting for. The story continues on in verse 6. It says, 2 disciples did as Jesus commanded. They stole somebody else's donkey. That's what they did. They brought the donkey to him, and he sat on it. Most of the crowd spread their garments on the road ahead of him, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Jesus was in the center of the procession, and the people all around him were shouting, blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. The entire city of Jerusalem was in an uproar as he entered. Who is this? They asked. And the crowd replied, it's Jesus. Like, I just picture myself in this moment that there were people there who had seen him heal the blind and raise the sick, walk on water. There were people that were there and they were like, I knew it. Like, I just knew it as I watched him live and I watched him talk and I watched him heal. I just knew it was going to be Jesus who was going to fulfill it. They had been waiting generations for this moment. And in he comes, riding on the back of a donkey in humility. And in this moment, they realize that it's Jesus who is going to fulfill the words that they've been waiting and hearing for generations. The crowd knows that he's the king. They know that he's the one that they've been waiting for, and they begin to yell, "Blessings on he who comes in the name of the Lord." And the city is in an uproar. There is a celebration. There is a festival breaking out. They are like freaking out, okay? The only thing that I can really like connect this to is when the Vikings win the Super Bowl, we're all going to freak out, okay? This is our year. I'm just going to say it because the season hasn't started and we haven't gone 0-15 yet. But Jerusalem is in this uproar, is in this excitement, is like, yes, it's finally happened. And unbelievably enough, it's happened in my lifetime. And they're so unbelievably excited. And they begin to ask, who is this? Because again, Jesus hasn't gone public with who he is. He hasn't been telling everybody that he is the Son of God, that he is the King, that he is the Messiah. He's just been humbly walking around. And the people that know just continue to say, it's Jesus. Who's the king? It's Jesus. Is this the Messiah? Yep, and it's Jesus. They're celebrating and they're excited. It's incredible to see and to understand that there is this uproar that's happening, that Jesus has come to Jerusalem. They're celebrating. And how are they celebrating? They're celebrating and they're honoring Jesus by cutting palm branches out of the trees around him, and they're taking off their outer garments, their outer coats, and they're laying them down in front of the donkey so that Jesus, his animal, would not step on the ground, but it would be elevated. They would be walking on soft ground. It was a sign of honor. It was a sign of reverence. It was a sign that he was the king, that he was holy, that he was worthy. So they do this as they yell, "Blessings on he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now these garments, on a little bit of a deeper dive into what these coats really meant, it's like, why would they throw their coats on the ground? It's not something that we naturally do. We wouldn't cut palm branches, but in this culture, there was an outer garment that everyone would wear. And this outer garment was something that you would put on every single day. It was used for protection. Again, this story is taking place in the Middle East, so it would protect them from the sun. It would also protect them from the cool. This outside garment was most important to the poor, to those who did not have a home, who did not have a place to go at night, because at night it could double as a blanket to keep them warm, to help them survive the night. It was a really, really significant part, a really, really well-known piece, a well-known article of clothing. They kept it to protect them. And this wasn't like this day and age where they would lay their coat down on the dirty road and the donkey would go on it and do its business on it, and then all of a sudden you just go back to your closet and pick out one of the other hundreds of outer garments that you would have. No, this was it. This was your outer shell. They couldn't just ruin it and get another one. And so they're literally taking the coat off of their back and they're laying it before Jesus. You see, this jacket, it was so important that it was protected by law. If someone owed you money, if someone owed you a debt, you could take everything that they owned except for their jacket. That's how important this jacket was in this culture. If they owed you money, you couldn't take it. Tough luck. You couldn't take it for any reason. And so Jesus is riding on the back of a donkey into Jerusalem, and the people are treating him like a king. They know that he is the king, that he is the Messiah, and that he is worthy. You see, the imagery of all this is the people are literally laying down one of their human rights down before Jesus. I think our culture could take some cues from this. And maybe, just maybe, we would set down some of our rights. We'd set down some of our preferences. We'd set down some of the things that we hold near and dear to us at the feet of Jesus. They are taking off one of their human rights and they're laying it down before Jesus to symbolize that, Jesus, you can have everything, my most prized and important possessions. They're here for you. They're giving Jesus their coats. And that's the first takeaway for each of us in this story, is I want to encourage you, give Jesus your coat. I'm not talking about your physical coat. I'm talking about what it represents in your life. What it represented in their life was safety and security and warmth and happiness. It represented one of their prized possessions, one of their closest and most intimate moments. They laid that down before Jesus. What is it for you? Because, friends, it's not enough to just stand in the crowd and yell and scream, "Blessed on he who comes in the name of the Lord." It's not enough to just be in the crowd and watch Jesus pass by. It's not enough to just be there and yell and scream as Jesus passed by. It requires that we would surrender, that we would take off, that we would lay the things that we hold most dear in front of him. Jesus is calling us to give him our coat. We need to give Jesus our coat. We need to give him our everything. And I'm not sure what this coat represents in your life. It probably means something different for all of us. It might be a relationship or the aspiration of a relationship. It may be your money or your time or your career or your home or your car or your 401k or your retirement plan or your clothing or your influence or your social media following. Whatever it is that you hold most near and dear, that you're like, yay, Jesus, but this is mine. Like you can have all this, but you can't have that. Whatever it is for you, my question is are you willing to give it up for Jesus? Are you willing to give it up for the King? Are you willing to allow that to be included inside of your mind's attention and heart's affection with you laying down your life before Jesus? And I'll just say it, some of us, we're not new to church. Some of us have been going to church for a long time, and we've seen Jesus go by a bunch of times. And sometimes we raise our hands, and sometimes we sing some songs, and sometimes we praise him, and sometimes we say, look, there's Jesus. And yet some of us still haven't given Jesus our lives. We haven't trusted him with our lives. We haven't trusted him with every different area of our life. And as we celebrate Palm Sunday, we look to the people, the Israelite people, as they see Jesus coming into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, and they lay everything down before him, and they say, you are worthy, that you are the King of Kings, and that you are worthy of everything that we have. They celebrate that he is the king that they've been waiting for. And so should we. And so that's today. That's Palm Sunday. Fast forward one day, we wake up on Monday morning and Jesus is going about his everyday, his normal schedule, his normal habits. And so he finds himself at the temple. He walks into the temple, and this is what we find that he sees in verse 12. Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. Jesus goes to the temple as was customary for him on a Monday morning. To go to temple, that would be modern day church, to go into the church and to worship in that moment. And when he walks in, again, he's done this many, many times before, but now he has entered into Jerusalem and he has been labeled as the king. He rode in on the donkey and now he is the king. He is the Messiah. He is known as the one who is worthy to be praised. And so when he goes into the temple, it's a different ballgame. And he goes in and he's not happy. And he begins to stir things up. In fact, he begins to turn over tables and he begins to drive people out. And he's like, this is supposed to be a house of prayer, a house of worship, and you have made it a den of robbers because you have come and you are selling sacrifices for your own profit. This is my house, this is God's house, and you are not going to profit from the house of the Lord. He turns over the tables and the benches. He stirs up what is happening in the temple because he doesn't like it. And he mixes things up. Jesus is stirring up the status quo. And he wants to do the same with you, and he wants to do the same with me. Jesus stirs up the status quo. And when we read this story, when we think about it, I think oftentimes we like to put ourselves on the margin of the story, and we like to be like, this is great. There's a couple of people that I'd like to introduce to Jesus that he could go and stir some things up in, right? You don't need to elbow your spouse right now. There's a few things that Jesus could stir up in you. Or that coworker, or that boss of mine, or that crazy neighbor, or this person, or that person. Yeah, God, I need you to go and stir up some stuff in all of these other people. You need to go do and right some wrongs that have been happening all around me. And yet what we find in here is Jesus doesn't make any disclaimers about who he's going to stir up the status quo on. He does it in this group of people, all of the people that are in that place. And so my question is, what about you? What about me? What about us when it comes to allowing Jesus to stir up the status quo in our lives? What about our lives? When Jesus walks into our lives, When he walks into our hearts, when we become followers of Jesus, he's no longer worried about everyone else at the end of our fingers that we point around. He is worried about us as well. And he wants to stir up the status quo in you and me as well. It's so easy to point your finger and to say, look at them. Jesus, go stir it up with them. Go shake things up with them. Go turn over some tables in their life. I got me under control, but go take care of them. But Jesus shows up in our life like he did in the temple, and he wants to stir up the status quo in your life and my life as well. But what does this mean? What does it mean to allow Jesus to come in and to stir up the status quo in our life? It's like, I'm doing okay, I'm doing all right, but what does it actually mean for Jesus to stir things up? Jesus wants to stir up things that aren't right with him. Things that aren't designed for his purposes, things that aren't a part of his perfect plan. He wants to look at your life and mine and stir things up, to stir up the status quo. A couple of months ago, my daughter, she walked into the house and she was limping. And this isn't uncommon. We live out in the country, and so they're always spraining ankles on the trampoline and running around. But she was limping pretty heavily, and I was like, babe, what's going on? She's like, I don't know, I stepped on something out in the yard. And I'm like, come over here and let me look at it. So she comes over, she lays down on the ground and puts her foot up in my hand, and there's a splinter right in the center of her foot. And she's like, Dad, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Dad? Dad, what are you going to do? Dad, what are you going to do? Dad, don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it, Dad. Dad, don't touch it. I'm like, babe, just looking at it. I'm just going to look at it for a minute. And I look in there, I say, babe, there's a splinter in your foot. And she's like, what are you going to do? Don't touch it. Don't take it out, Dad. It's going to hurt. What are you going to do? And I just looked at her and I said, babe, if I don't take it out, it's going to get worse. It's going to hurt worse, and it's going to get more infected, and we're going to end up having to go to the doctor, and then they're going to have to take it out, and it's going to be more painful. We've got to take it out or else it's going to get worse. And she's like, don't take it out, Dad. Just leave it. It'll work itself out. It'll figure itself out. I don't want you to touch it. Don't take it out, Dad. And I just continued to reassure her, babe, I will be as gentle as I possibly can, but the splinter has to come out. Friends, this is what it looks like when Jesus wants to stir things up in our lives. Is yes, sometimes he comes in and he has to turn over tables and he has to break a few things. But whenever possible, he's gentle and kind, and he just looks at us and he says, it's just going to continue to get worse if you don't let me fix it. If you don't let me stir it up, if you don't let me put it back together in the way that I created it, in the way that I created you, if you don't allow me to put the pieces back together, if you don't allow me to pull out the splinters and take out the brokenness, it will just continue to get worse and worse and worse. Jesus wants to stir up the status quo, not because he wants you to feel a bunch of guilt, a bunch of shame, a bunch of hurt, and a bunch of pain, but because he wants you to heal. And he wants you to be whole, and he wants you to experience the goodness and the plan and the purpose that he has for you, fully and wholly. But we have to be willing to allow him to come and stir things up. We have to trust that he's willing to come in and stir up the status quo so that he can put things back together the way that he designed them. He does it because he wants what's better for us. Because he knows what's best for us. He can see what's happening in the future. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He wants to toss anything that's dragging you down out. And he wants to be gentle and kind whenever possible. Friends, what does Jesus need to stir up inside of you? What does he need to stir up inside of me? And so this is Monday. Sunday, Jesus rides into Jerusalem for the last time on a donkey, and it's celebrations, and it's palm branches, and it's laying down everything before Jesus. Monday morning, he wakes up and he turns over some tables and tries to right things inside of the temple, again, establishing himself as king. Goes to bed on Monday night, wakes up Tuesday morning, and finds himself in front of the religious authorities, the pastors of that day, and they begin to stir up some things of their own, trying to create some dissension in the ranks, trying to get Jesus trapped so that they can get their own authority authority back because this authority, these religious leaders, they've got all the power. They've created a laundry list of do's and don'ts, things to do and things to not do so that they can be in right standing with God. And Jesus is saying, it's not all about all of these other things. It's not all about this do's and don'ts. You don't have to do all of these things. I have come to give you a new message, a new way of thinking, a new life, a new experience, a relationship with God that doesn't require a laundry list of do's and don'ts. And so they begin to stir up these things. And what we find in verse 35, this is what it says. One of them, an expert in religious law, I love that it says it that way, an expert in religious law tried to trap Jesus with this question. Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your minds. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. So the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they are stirring up dissension, and Jesus again is turning religion on its head, and he's saying it is not about do's and don'ts. That's religion. What I am talking about is different than religion. It's actually more relationship, and that relationship is rooted in two things: love God and love people. Love God and love one another. Love God and love the people around you. Notice there's no disclaimer. Love your neighbor. Love the people around you. No matter who it is, no matter what they've done, love them. This doesn't mean you have to be in relationship with them, but you can love them. Jesus has called us across the board, love God and love one another. It's as simple as that. Notice, it is simple. Love God, love people. But it is not easy, is it? If you've been in a relationship or a friendship, or you have kids for no longer than 30 seconds, you know that loving people is a challenge. Obviously, many of you don't have any relationships with any people. Loving people is hard. It's messy. It's complicated. It's difficult. It's incredibly simple, but it's not incredibly easy. But it's the calling that Jesus has put on us. It's the example that he has given to us. Friends, sometimes it's way easier to come to church and to sing about love. It's easier to talk about love. It's easier to understand love or define love. But it's a little bit more difficult to actually love. There's times when life is difficult, when life is challenging, to love God. Sometimes it's like, God, what are you doing? Where are you at? Do you see what I'm going through? Do you see what I'm walking through? It becomes challenging at times to love God, and then that person disappoints you or hurts you or does something to you or around you that hurts your feelings. And it gets messy. This idea of loving God and loving people. It's just not that easy to do, but it's simple to understand. But if you're wondering how to go deeper in your relationship with God, to get closer to the character of Jesus, to know the man of Jesus, to understand him more fully, if you're wondering how to go further in your relationship with God and love people. If you're trying to figure out how to give God your coat, to surrender everything to him, love God and love people. If you're looking for a way to allow Jesus to stir up the things inside of you, love God and love people. It's the way and the actions of Jesus. It's the way that he loved. It's the way that he lived. And it's the way that he has called you and I to live as well. When we focus on loving God and loving people, we're following in Jesus' footsteps. We're following him. We're doing what he has called us to. And that is the calling of all followers of Jesus, to follow in the way of Jesus, to follow in the practices of Jesus. This is what he did, and it's what he's asked us to do. And again, not just some people, all people. That person that you don't deem as worthy, that person you don't like to love, the person you don't want to love, Jesus is calling us to love those people as well. Do you know how I know that? Because as Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem for the last time, the same people that were laying down the palm branches and laying down their coats and saying, Jesus, we give you everything. Blessed on he who comes in the name of the Lord, would be the same people who would send him to the cross on Friday night. And he walked in and he loved them and he cared for them and he smiled and he saw them and he knew them. When the religious leaders came to him and challenged him, he knew that they were going to be the ones who would end up sending him to a criminal's death. And yes, he engaged with them. And rather than just being mad and upset, he goes to them and he says, just love God and love people. Those are the greatest commandments. Jesus loved the people who were difficult in his life, and he's calling us to do the same. If you're looking for a way to go deeper in your walk with Jesus, it comes down to two things: to love God and to love people. And so that's the first 3 days of this timeline. That's Palm Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. That's the beginning of this final week of Jesus as he walks himself towards the cross and eventually to Easter morning. The timeline has begun. Friends, Jesus is the King that we've been waiting for. And he's worthy of our praise. And he's worthy of our everything. He's worthy of our lives. He's worthy of our attention. He's worthy of our affection. He's worthy of everything we have in this life, everything that we hold dear. But we need to give him our coat. We need to give him our everything. He wants to stir up the status quo in you and me as well. And lastly, he wants us to follow in his footsteps. To love him, to love God, and to love people. As we walk through this week, I hope and pray that each and every one of us would find time and find an opportunity to surrender our lives to him, to lay ourselves before him, to surrender everything, to allow him to stir everything up, and to love God and to love people at every opportunity that we have. Because friends, it's a simple calling that Jesus has given us, but it's not easy. And I hope and pray that you and I are up to the task. Let's pray. God, I thank you and I praise you for your example, for the way that you lived and the way that you loved and the way that you encouraged us to do the exact same. And so, God, I just pray that in this moment that you'd allow us to see you, to see opportunities that you place before us in everything that we do and everything that we have, God. I just pray that you would allow this week your example in the way that you interacted with your skeptics, the way that you interacted with the people who didn't love you in return, God. I pray that we would find a way, find an opportunity to love you, to serve you, and to love and serve those around us. God, I just pray by the power of your Holy Spirit that there would be breakthrough in this room. God, that in your house, in this place, that your spirit would be experienced. God, that there would be courage that would break out in this place. That people would know you more fully, that we would see you more clearly. And God, that we would lay everything that we have at your feet, that we'd give you everything, not just our possessions, but our lives, God. God, that we would open ourselves up to allow you to step in and to reacclimate us to you, to rearrange the pieces of our lives in a way that is according to your plan. God, give us the courage to love you and to love one another. God, that we would find ways to worship you each and every day. And we'd enter into your goodness. Jesus, we are so incredibly thankful for your example. Thankful for the way that you love us, for the way that you are worthy of our praise. And God, I just pray that you just enter into this moment as we walk towards Easter, that we be reminded that you are good and that you are for us. It's in your name that we pray.